Well, hello all. It's your girl Julia here. So, whenever most people find out that I'm transgender, the first question they always have is, how did you know? So to get right to the point, the main reason I'm making this video is there's a lot of people that have been questioning themselves. And I figured I'd make this as a way to kind of help you on your journey, either to show that you're trans or that you're not. But before we begin, here is the biggest disclaimer. So, as we go through life, everybody experiences it differently. We all have different perceptions, different outcomes, and different goals. Being transgender is the same exact way. What works for one won't always work for the other. Since no two life experiences are the same with being transgender. I'm going to be giving this from the male to female perspective because, well, that's what I am. I might be able to give some perspective on the female to male perspective, but I think that would be better left to a handsome trans man rather than a trans woman. And probably the biggest one, if you find that perhaps you are transgender after watching this video, just know that the next step is up to you. If you want to go through hormone replacement therapy, if you want to get surgery, or if you just want to dress a little different and have people call you by different names and pronouns, that is all your choice. And nobody should be forcing you to make any of those choices. If they are, you probably better think about going to a different provider of some sort. So let's start with the basics. The first thing to note is that there is an extreme difference between cross-dressing and transitioning. With cross-dressing, that's all you need. You just like the clothing that is not to your assigned gender. When you take them off, you still want to be yourself, but you still want to be wearing them. That is really the key difference between being transgender and a cross-dresser. If you're transgender, then you can't stand the body that's underneath all the clothing and that you wish it would change. If you're a cross-dresser, you just like the clothing and you have no problem with what your body looks like. I know there's a lot of other transgender people out there that know from a young age, say like 5 or 8 or 16, something like that. I didn't really figure it out until I was 25. So rest assured, it took me a while, but that is one of the major things to keep in mind. Just because you didn't really notice the signs throughout your entire life does not mean that you aren't transgender. Do not have anybody invalidate you because of a point like that. So I guess let me just tell you a little bit about myself. The main thing that kind of prompted this is that it was a course I was taking in college, and there was this one female student that I found myself very attracted to. This was the first time I've ever felt this kind of attraction before. The odd thing is, outside of the classroom, I was just scouring transgender forums, as well as just a whole bunch of general questions about being transgender. And then I got to a point where I'm like, why am I so interested in this? So kind of fast forward a little bit, the virus has pretty much taken over the world and I'm stuck at home just being left alone with myself and my thoughts. It took me quite a bit of courage to be able to ask that question, am I transgender? But I was not only able to do so, but in ways I was kind of happy to hear what the answer was. Whenever I look back, and I always tell people what it was like to realize I was transgender, it's probably best if I just act it out. At first I'm just kind of like, yes, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm just transgender. How am I supposed to tell everybody this? So it was just kind of major happiness followed by, wow, this is kind of a big responsibility, isn't it? So from there, the first thing I wanted to do was see a therapist just to be absolutely concrete certain that I was transgender and not some other thing. So after a little while with the therapist, it just seemed a bit more obvious that I was transgender each time. The main bit of advice that my therapist gave me, and that I think would probably help you out as well, is the idea of taking it in small steps. Start with basics. Find a close friend or a relative and just ask them to call you a different name or pronoun. Does this make you happy? If yes, that's a good sign. Next step, try to see if you can find some clothes that fit into the other gender that you want to be. Try to ignore the comfort level because, well, obviously, women don't have those jiggly bits, so clothing is not really built around that. That's the main thing to keep in mind. But the main thing is, how do these clothes make you feel? Do they make you happy? Do they make you empowered? Do you feel depressed when you have to take them off? If so, that's good. You're almost there. And then the next part builds up quite a bit of courage. If you can potentially find a good pair of clothes of the other gender and just try to go out in public. How do you feel about how people perceive you? Do you like being perceived as this other gender you're presenting as? Or do you feel kind of uncomfortable with this? If you feel kind of uncomfortable, well then you should probably think a little more deeply about this. It could be possible that maybe you're just a cross-dresser. You like the look and the feel of the clothes. So it's very important to distinguish the difference between the two. If you feel quite comfortable presenting as the other gender, you prefer another gender's name or pronouns, I'd say the next step is, if your therapist thinks it's a good idea, to potentially seek medical attention. Take it slow. Don't go all out with surgeries, as such a thing, while reversible, is insanely expensive. And if you find out that you're perfectly fine as the gender you are, then, well, it'd be better to keep everything original now, would it? But the main thing is, just take it slow. This is a very big decision. After all, you're potentially going to be legally changing your name. You're going to be changing your body. You're going to be changing how everybody looks at you. So just try to make sure that you're certain before you go to really extreme measures, because it's going to be expensive and, well, you're probably just going to upset yourself more if you find out that you're not trans after you've been transitioning for several years. I will admit, when I first started making this video, I was kind of tempted to go for one of those, I would just kind of ask you a series of quick questions and then see how you answered, and then if you answered a certain way or not, then you actually are or aren't transgender. That is just not a good idea, as everybody experiences this very differently. Another thing to keep in mind is that, well, signs aren't necessarily present from an early age like a lot of people think. There are some that don't realize they're transgender until they're in their mid-60s. And then there's some in the middle, like me, that realize they're transgender at the age of their mid-20s. But just because you haven't noticed or seen signs very early in life does not invalidate your transition. However, to get a better understanding if you're transgender or not, I'm just gonna go through a series of scenarios that I've heard from other transgender people. So let's start with early childhood. If you were given the option to wear another gender's clothing, did you? And if you did, how did that make you feel? If it made you feel happy, then odds are you are transgender. If not, well then let's keep looking. Were you interested in feminine things when you were younger? This is not a sign that you are transgender whatsoever. After all, you ever heard of bronies? My Little Pony was targeted towards a majority female audience, but yet seems to have gained a great fan base among males. That does not mean that these males are gay or trans. It just means that they like it. So if you liked feminine things, that does not mean that you're transgender. It just means that's what you like. One other one that, let me see if I can try to figure out how to keep this PG at least. So this is a sign that I've heard a lot of other transgender people talk about. Did you ever think that your parents were trying to hide your true gender from you? Big example. I don't know why, but for some reason in junior high school I was convinced that I was a hermaphrodite and that I was actually becoming a woman through my puberty. Obviously, after puberty hit, I was rather disappointed that I did not, well, look like this. But remember, with any of these signs, these are not deal breakers or deal makers. In the end, it is your decision. Do not make it anybody else's. So here's probably one of the biggest ones, and this one is definitely something I can agree with. Is this something that has been present for years? Have you wanted to be the other gender for more than a period of, say, 6 months? If it's been more than 6 months, then odds are you are transgender. I know for me, the desire to be a woman was in some way, shape, or form present since probably 12, maybe 13 or so. I don't want to get too gross with the details, as I want this to be for more general audiences. But the main thing to keep in mind is, has this desire to be another gender been present for a while? And if the answer is yes, this is something you should heavily look into. So here's probably one of the biggest ones for me, and it'll probably help you a lot as well. So one of the main reasons I wasn't really sure if I was trans or not is, well, I found myself rather, let's just say I found myself very pretty whenever I would present feminine. It would make me happy. It would make me feel all kinds of emotions that, well, I probably shouldn't go too deep into, but I hope that gives a good enough picture without actually saying a word that'll make this get demonetized. But the main thing to keep in mind is that's perfectly normal. There are a lot of people out there that look in the mirror and they like what they see. They feel happy, they feel pretty, they feel handsome, they feel all kinds of emotions that are hard to describe. This is probably the last one I can think of as well. I will admit, this was kind of a hard video to make, as I'm trying to go from my own experiences as well as general experiences I've heard around. But this is a biggie. How do you feel when you look in the mirror? I know for me, for the longest time, whenever I looked in the mirror, up until about maybe when I had to start shaving at like the age of 14 or 15 or so, I did not know what was looking back at me. It felt weird. I just didn't like what I was seeing. But I had no way of describing why or how. I just always chalked it up to the idea that I'm not a very vain person. Looks are not very important to me. But this is a general thing I've heard of from other transgender people. If you look in the mirror and you feel disgusted with what you see, well, first thing is, try a different look. You know, maybe try growing your hair out, trying a little bit of makeup, lipstick, eyeshadow, stuff like that. Try not to go to too much extremes, because just because you don't like how you look doesn't mean that you're necessarily transgender. In fact, here's just kind of a quick thing, and then I'll probably end the video after that. As I've started to transition, I've actually like how I look in the mirror. I care that my hair might be a mess sometimes, so I actually want it to be combed, I want it to be straight, I want it to look halfway presentable. There are even times I look in the mirror and I feel kind of bashful. Sometimes I'll just kind of be like, because I'm not used to seeing such beauty in there, and it makes me happy. And that's really the ultimate goal there of transitioning is, does it make you feel happy? If it doesn't, there's a lot of things there. It could be possible maybe you're still just trying to get used to being the other gender. After all, you were kind of told you were one way for so many years, and then thinking you may be another, that's completely different. But the main piece of advice is just take it gradually. There is no hurry. After all, if you're like me, you've been stuck as the gender you don't really like so much for about 20 years. What's another, say, 10 to correct that? There's plenty of time, so never feel the need to rush, and also never feel the need to be pressured. If somebody is pressuring you to transition in any way, that is a big no-no. Avoid this person. Talk to people that aren't forcing you to do something you don't want to do. This is a pretty big step. Well, it's pretty disconnected, but I hope I was able to give you some perspective. If I wasn't necessarily able to crack that shell of yours, starting the conversation is probably the most important thing. Well, until next time, be yourself, no matter who that is.